I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. This is our public hearing on House Bill 581. So in last session, the Georgia legislature approved House Bill 581, and the legislation required a referendum, of which the voters voted on in November of last year. So what this does is it places caps or limits on the assessed values of homesteaded properties. It also enacts a statewide floating homestead exemption, and cities can decide to opt out of offering the exemption. So here's the referendum language that the voters saw. And I'll just read this. I know it's a bit long, but I'm going to read it anyway. Shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended so as to authorize the General Assembly to provide by general law for a statewide homestead exemption that serves to limit increases in the assessed value of homesteads, but which any county, consolidated government, municipality, or local school system may opt out of upon the completion of certain procedures? I failed to say this at the beginning of the meeting, but I hope this is a very interactive slideshow in which you offer comments or questions on each slide, and then at the end we can discuss more, of course. So under House Bill 581, each city as well as the county has an opt-out provision. This comes with advertising and 3 public hearings. So this is the first of our 3 public hearings. If you don't opt out, you are automatically opted in. The opt-out must be completed and certified by the Georgia Secretary of State by March 1st, 2025. So we must have these 3 public hearings and then consider a resolution. If the city does choose to opt out, we must file it with the Secretary of State's office before March 1st. It does not mean taxes will automatically increase if we are opting out. Millage rates are still lowered, kept the same, rolled back by council as it has always been done. So opting out would be the way that it's always been done. It has no effect on our existing school tax exemption for senior citizens. Sure. They might be, I'm sorry. Correct. I was at a meeting yesterday in which I heard that they are still moving forward on making that date May 1st instead of March 1st, but that we don't have time to not do it by March 1st in case it doesn't go. Yes. So the annual limit, the statewide floating homestead exemption imposes an annual limit on value increases of properties with a homestead exemption. So it must be a primary residence, owner-occupied residence, and it must be kept current on the tax rolls or the tax digest by the tax assessor's office. The annual limit is set by the Georgia Department of Revenue and is tied to inflation. It's not clear which inflation it's going to be tied to yet. They've mentioned CPI, but there are a lot of different CPIs it could be tied to. So we've made this presentation on our best guess of CPIs that we use. The taxable value of a home resets when the property is sold or significant improvements are completed. So, yes?
When it says tied to the annual inflation, but isn't there a maximum increase of 3%?
Yes.
Okay, so that doesn't say that. That would mean that if it's tied to inflation, inflation was 5%, then it's no longer tied to inflation. It would be the cap, and I don't think that says that.
Right. And so if it's 1.8%, then it would be 1.8%. But if it's 5, you're correct, and that it would be 3.
If it's over 3, it's capped at 3.
Right. Okay. Right. And we'll see that throughout the slides to come.
That's still coming?
Yes, sir. So this House bill also provides for an option of a FLOST tax, a floating local option sales tax, as a mean of recouping the revenue lost by the value limitations. So this would have to be approved by the voters on a referendum. And the legislators, even our legislators, thought that FLOST was sort of an automatic in the bill, that if you are opting in, you would automatically have a FLOST tax, because they recognized that we were going to lose revenue with this bill. So the idea was to shift the revenue coming into the city from the property taxes to a sales tax. However, it must be approved by the voters in the referendum. Hall County has 9 municipalities, and unless all of those municipalities are either opting in or have some type of floating homestead exemption themselves, then it's off the table. So it's an all or none deal.
And even if it was, we were pursuing that, then it has to be approved by the voters. Is that correct?
It would.
So it would be just as popular as our T-Splost?
It would. In my opinion, it would be.
So it would not happen?
I think that is very likely. So this is a big question of local control. The meeting I was at yesterday was the Georgia City County Managers Association and our regional commission's district meeting. And there's a lot of talk about this amongst the state, amongst all the cities and counties, and then we talked about this a lot yesterday. And it really is taking some local control away from local governments. Flowery Branch's initial cost would be approximately $59,000 in year one. Now, this is an estimate based on numbers that we knew that we had in 2023 from the governor's homestead exemption that he allowed. I think it was $18,000 of a credit per home. So we knew from 2023 how many homestead exemptions we have in the city of Flowery Branch, and you'll see that throughout. So the cost to the city of Flowery Branch would increase each year as market conditions change. In a decade, it could equal several $1 million per year. That's actually not a true statement, because we reran our numbers with only homesteaded properties, and I think in a decade it would be just under $1 million. So I'll correct that by the next public hearing. Tax loss burdens would then shift to commercial properties, including small businesses and rental properties. So if this happens, and if council chooses to deliver the same level of service, then the burden will come from somewhere. The taxes will come from somewhere. City councils of the future may be placed in precarious positions each year to raise the millage rate to provide that same level of service, much less increase a level of service. So again, questioning whether local governments have local control. This is just pointing out that over 20 years, the value of a home that is a homesteaded property has moved 3% or less per year. And then a home that is not homesteaded, or if someone comes in and buys a property next door to that property, the property taxes are going to be much larger next door. So it's creating an inequity when it comes to paying for services. So future borrowing for infrastructure may be more costly as well, because as you all have seen recently, when we maintained our AA2 rating with Moody's, one of the things that they look at is the strength of our digest, the strength of our general fund, and the strength of those property taxes. So that could be an increase in interest rates on any borrowings that we have, which would then be passed on to our ratepayers, or our bonds are always backed by the full faith and credit of the local government, which means property taxes could be raised to cover the debt. Opting out is a decision that permanently cedes some taxing authority to the state rules. So if we opt in, that's what I should have said, opting in, we're opting in forever. There's no going back. So the financial impact on the city of Flowery Branch from 2016 to 2024, this was a 9-year look. Well, it's 9 years of looking at data, but there's 8 years of increases because the first year stays steady. And this is based on that 2023 number that we knew. A lot of this is based on the 2023 number. We actually knew these numbers from the tax assessor's office, though. So the value of homesteaded properties increased on average by 10.14%. The value of non-homesteaded properties increased on average by 11%. And the CPI from 2016 to 2024 increased on average by 3.41%. So here are the CPI values. This is on the CPI numbers that we use for our area, and that has just been broken out in the past several years. So prior to that is CPI for the nation, but this is for our region. So you see the average CPI. So if it's tied to this inflation rate, that's how much property tax assessed values for homesteaded properties would have gone up, except for 2021, 2022, and 2023, it would have been held at 3%. But this, I believe, is why state legislators took it upon themselves to limit revenue to local governments is those years after COVID happened. But then sheltering, it only makes up about 36% of this average CPI. So sheltering is broken out a little bit differently, and those rates are a bit more. It's just the housing market, either what rent is or what property homes are selling for. However, if you go to the grocery store, my bread, my milk, my eggs went up more than 1.1%, 4.8%, 3%, whatever the number is. So there's a lot that goes into these numbers, but we'll talk about that more later. Well, I'll just go ahead and say, so in my opinion, we have the general fund budget, we have general fund revenues, we have general fund expenses. Everything that the city of Flowery Branch pays for has gone up by inflation every year. No one asked us if we wanted our copier leases to go up. No one asked us if we wanted, well, we have agreements. I mean, it goes up by the agreement amount. But in the world, no one asks you if your bread goes up, or if you would like to vote it out. The bread cannot go up. The milk, energy, everything that you pay for. So in our budget, we try to pay our employees. We try to give a COLA. We try to make sure that their dollar they're earning today is the same as the dollar they earned a year ago, 2 years ago, previously. Same with everything that we pay for within the budget. And what this bill is doing is limiting that inflation on the revenue side. So health insurance, remember our first quote came in this year at a 43% increase. And we were able to negotiate, and we got that down to 29%. But these costs go up, and this is limiting the revenue that comes in to the city.
So bottom line, this places an artificial cap that does not reflect economic reality.
That is what happens, in my opinion.
So when the price of goods go up, we benefit from that in the city because we get lost money, we get SPLOST money. So we benefit from that. So when we say that, we're paying more for this, that, and the other, I know some groceries, I think if they're healthy, they're not taxed at all, and then others are taxed, obviously. And then you think about utilities go up. We benefit from that because we get these fees from the utilities. So this particular thing here is only impacting a small, I won't say small, it's impacting a rather large revenue stream. But we've got all these other revenue streams that are actually benefiting from inflation. So I just wanted to point that out because this isn't our only revenue stream, and this only impacts homes that are homesteaded. So it doesn't impact rentals. I know that was mentioned in there. It doesn't impact commercial buildings, all those kinds of things. So.
What is our primary revenue stream?
It's property taxes.
And just behind it is lost. And just behind it is lost, right?
Yeah, it's pretty close. I'll just make a point on the loss. Whereas, yeah, that your point is accurate, but keep in mind a lot of that, what we actually receive, a lot of people think if you spend money here, it comes back to us. That's not how it works. You spend money in the county, it goes to the state, and it comes back based on those negotiated percentages with Hall County. So a lot of that depends on how much faster the other cities are growing versus us. So right, I think a few years ago, ours doubled because we grew a lot. But say Gainesville added 25,000 people and we only added 5, that percentage is going to drop. So yes, the sales tax does go up, but if those percentages are affected, we could lose revenue. So your point is accurate where that should go up, but if we lose a percentage in terms of what we receive in the total county, our revenue could go down. So that's why this is very important to consider, because there are a lot of variables that change a lot of different revenue streams, and this is just one variable that affects property tax.
We've had a lot of growth. South Hall has had a lot of growth, but as you look now and you look up at Lula and that area and the area around the new
Inland port.
Yeah, the inland port. That's what I was trying to think of. But yeah, I think that's going to be the next Flowery branch because they're going to start growing like crazy. Well, in fact, Lula already is. So
I know for a fact that they have one neighborhood in the city limits that's got close to 400 homes, and you saw Hall County. If they choose to opt in or annex into Hall County, there's another 280 homes. So, at 3 people per home, that's what 2,000 or 3,000 people.
that's going to
Double the population.
make our percentage go down on all those things.
But loss projections are way up year over year over the last few years. And then SPLOS projections are way up over the last few years. I know there's some engineer that usually sits down and does all that work, and they say this is what you would be expected to earn, and that's been blown out of the water.
Yeah, our loss projections went up significantly when that percentage changed, but we're kind of seeing a flat trend right now in terms of what we saw a major increase last year and the year before to this year is probably going to be relatively the same, we think. So I think it's around a little over $2 million. So I wouldn't anticipate it going up much more right now.
How often are the cities reevaluated? This is done based on it's that census every 10 years, right?
Yes, sir.
So 'cause I know when we were growing fast from 2015 to 2020, we were like, we felt like, we weren't necessarily getting a fair shake until they reevaluated that thing. So, we'll do the next one will be done in 2030,
That's correct.
and it won't be
A year or two after.
a year or two
Right.
after before we actually reap any kind of benefit.
Correct.
Or anything. So, okay.
So to put that in context, I don't have our exact percentages, but prior to this most recent renegotiation of lost, we had about 2.8% was coming to the city of Flowery Branch, and that went up to like 4.6% coming to the city of Flowery Branch. So that is all that's been in Hall County. We get 4% of it, or 4.6. But that's, yes, also something to consider.
Yeah. And you can see these percentages are going down now. I mean, and I sure understand that. I mean, the effects on homeowners.
Right.
When you have the CPI, all those numbers, it's wild. But
right. And we saw it in the housing market. The price of housing alone went through the roof in these years. And the legislators wanted to deal with that But they chose to deal with that with local government revenue rather than state government revenue. And it was a reaction to those years, but the cost of everything went up over all of those years. And now it's sort of kind of teetered off a bit, and even though the home prices are still astronomical, this inflation year over year over year has slowed.
Right.
So we've kind of talked a lot about that 2016 to 2024 look back. And so I think we've kind of talked a little bit about some forecasts. I mean, we thought it might be a little bit more important to look back in history and see how, if, assuming a few things, if this had been in place in 2016, what that would look like. So this slide has some assumptions in it, which I'm going to talk about, but kind of gives you a picture of what, had this been in place in 2016, what that would have meant to the city of Flowery Branch. So also we mentioned, that one of those assumptions is 2023, when we got the homestead exemption from the state governor grant. So we were able to capture the number of homestead exempt properties in the city of Flowery Branch, since we currently don't have a homestead exemption other than that time period, which was about 2,206 properties. And we also were able to calculate that made up about 55% or 52% of the R1 classified properties. And so we took that percentage and applied it across the board to every year, assuming that we had 52% of R1 classified properties. So what you see here at the top of the graph is the millage rate during that time period and the inflationary growth time rate over that same time period, which you saw on the previous slide. Moving down to the middle section, you see a residential property taxable value. That top line is what was actually the actual tax digest value of the R1 property at 52% from the assessor. The next line is entitled House Bill 581 Real Property Taxable Value, took the base year in 2016 of $81 million, which is, again, 55% of the R1 classified properties, and projected the inflationary growth for each year from the previous year. So, for example, where you see 1.1% in the 2017 column, that was the actual inflationary growth based on CPI for 16. So it looks back 1 year. And this does not assume the 3% growth for those for 22, 23, and 24. So you can surmise that this might be a little bit higher, and we can correct that 3% growth for the next slide, public hearing. And then the next line down is just the difference in taxable value between those two lines. So moving down to the, I'm going to call it salmon color line, because I don't want to say pink, is the difference in taxes generated based on our 3.264 millage rate per year. So you see in 17 it's about 48,000, 119,000, 161, and so forth. The next line down is the difference in taxes cumulative. So from 17 to 18, we moved to 168, et cetera. So you see in 2024, had this been in place in 2016, it would be around $2.7 million in potentially lost revenue. And then the final line is just kind of a reminder of, what we were able to achieve in terms of hiring police officers, because I know public safety is a big, a large part of what we do here. We're adamant on making sure our public safety is up to what it should be, so we can ensure our citizens are safe. So you see that we were able to hire 10 police officers in the last 3 years. So think about, if we didn't have that revenue, would we have been able to do that? Think about all the things that we've achieved you know, in the city to make it a better place to live, work, and play, would we have been able to achieve some of those things? Probably yes, but probably not all of those. So this is just kind of a picture looking back in time based on the data we know and what it could have been had this been in place in 16.
So I got a quick question.
Yes.
So based on these numbers, and just a general question, we said if a house is sold, what about refinanced? Does that get by the new? Would it not be reduced by the cap?
I don't think that it.
That would
has
not
any-
apply.
It
It would still be, it would still be homesteaded. Yes.
And it doesn't affect the base rate, I think is what your question's getting at. It's only, what the law currently says is only if it's sold or significant improvements are done. But there's no definition of significant improvement, so we're not real sure what that means.
Yeah.
Put in a pool.
Potentially.
So, but just going back, so these numbers are just, they're the worst case, right? They don't show like how many houses were sold out of these numbers, the differences,
Right.
and all that stuff. I guess that's really my question. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
So,
This just assumes everybody lived in their house for
Across the
that
whole
time period. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
but it's, some homesteaded properties came on, some went off. So it could have been 58% some year, it could have been 40% one year. This is
We added
just,
a bunch of properties during this time frame, right?
A lot of the properties we've added in at least the last 3 years probably would have been homestead exempt properties. So,
Did we, when was the last time we raised the millage rates? Anybody remember?
yeah, I think it was
2015?
right.
How long did we leave it at that? Did we,
It went from,
it went down, didn't it go back up the next
it
year?
was down at like 2.6 or 8, and then went up to 3.337, and then came down to 3.264 the next year, I think is what it was.
Yeah. But we only lowered it 1 year.
Right. It was in the 2s, I think, for a long time, and then it got increased to 3.337 or something like that, and then came down to 3.264 the next year.
Joe, or what was the reason that it was lowered then? Do you recall?
Because when the council, on a split vote 3-2, decided to raise it a half a mil.
No, I'm talking about lowered, when it lowered.
Yeah, but that was part of it. So when they decided to raise it by a half mil, they wanted to fund the local resources fund with that half mil. So they had said in public meetings that what they would do is that they would begin to roll it back to kind of soften the blow of the half mil. So the following year, they rolled it back a little bit. They didn't roll it all the way back, but they rolled it to make it to where it's, you know, neutral. But
That's
they
where it
rolled
is,
back a little
that's
bit.
where it is now?
And that's where it is now. Yes,
Okay.
it was 1 year with it.
That was 2015.
Right.
Any other questions on this slide? This is just another picture of that data. I know a lot of people kind of learn differently, and so we just wanted to put it in a graphical nature so you could see the orange there is the House Bill 581 tax revenue, and then the blue line is the actual. So you can kind of see, I think that's the difference per year. And then this is just another representation of the lost tax revenue had we been in place in 2016. So you can kind of see, again, this assumes everybody stayed in their house for that same time period. We know that's probably not the case because people. Yeah. Well, this just uses the digest value, so it would be homes that were existing and they already were owned. Right, right. Well, by using the digest, it picks up those homes that were added. So there would be some inflationary growth, which is what we're talking about, but there would also be new growth in those numbers. Yeah. but by using the 55%, you know. Yeah, yeah.
Are we going? Is there going to be a slide showing going forward? Because you could look at this. You could look at this one two ways. If you were a taxpayer, you could look at this and say, because of how high the houses have gone, you could look how much more I've had to pay because the rule wasn't in effect, and look at that as being, is that a windfall of a couple of years where we paid? If you were, you bought your house and you're cruising along with your taxes, and all of a sudden, because there's no control, just standing still in your own house, you had these kind of increases to your taxes. I don't know, are you scaring people with this?
No, I don't. The reason why we do not have a forecasting, because we don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 years. I mean, it could look exactly like this picture in terms of the percentage increase, or it could be 3% a year, or it could be 1% a year. And I don't think it's fair to put that number out there if we don't know what happens. That's why we did a look back. There was originally some forecasting. The more I thought about it, I was like, this isn't an actual picture of what happened, and I don't think it's fair to assume that we might go up 5% one year or 8% the next when we don't know that's going to happen.
You don't want to guess.
Right.
I think that's a good point, though. You brought that up about.
I mean, we could assume that, we know we're at the pinnacle now of the housing market, and it's going to be relatively stagnant, but
This is what
we
happened.
could have thought that 10 years ago, and it didn't happen. So, I just don't think that's a fair picture. This next slide is kind of seeing the picture back to 2021 based on those same assumptions on the previous slides, but looking at one home and what that means and the differences. And so currently, during this tax year, the median home value was around $450,000 in Hall County. We know that, that's Hall County. We know that Flowery Branch is probably a little bit different than that number, but we use that number because we know that's what the median home is in the county. And so we found a property that met that value today and looked back at their assessed value through 2021. And then we applied those same percentages, inflationary growth, to that same house. So you can see in the top slide there, that's the property value at assessed value. So this home was valued at $450,200 this year. And you see the previous values. So in 2021, it was valued at $299,500. And you see the growth there. And then you see the taxable value, which is the 40% value, and the property tax generated through those years for a total of $101,977. The bottom slide is the property value at inflationary growth from the previous slides that we saw. So we went back to 2021, assuming that it started at $299,500 and applied that inflationary growth. So you see the value of that same home today will be around $327,000 versus $450,000. And there's a difference there of about $300 in property tax for that same time period.
Hang on a second. I got a question or a comment. I'm not sure which it is, but so I own this home, let's say, and my home value went from almost $300,000 up to $450,000. And tootling along the way we go now, if we were to opt out, then I'm paying taxes on that $450,000. Property tax.
Assuming the assessor valued it at that. Yeah.
Now, if we incorporate or we opt in by doing nothing, then I'm paying taxes in 2024 for $327,000 when, in fact, I'm enjoying the fact that my home value went up, but I'm not paying for it. So who's paying for that?
The person that bought the house next to you. Or the commercial properties or small businesses.
So still, we're just talking about artificially reducing the value for tax purposes of a home.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this next slide takes just the difference per year between those two calculations and kind of shows it. And then you remember that 2,206 homes I stated in 2023 from the governor's grant. So we just applied that here to see what that kind of looked like. So that kind of is a forward-looking picture for this 1 year, 2024. But that's showing about $750,000 in difference in revenue.
So this is one of the slides that we see every year when we adopt the millage rate. And this is simply to point out that all that we've been talking about throughout this public hearing is for that sliver on the right-hand side of every dollar you pay in taxes, about 11 cents of it goes to the city of Flowery Branch. The rest, the bulk of it goes to the school board, 59 cents. The rest goes to Hall County, that's 30 cents. So I did want to point out, too, in preparing these slides, I have watched tons of YouTube videos of other cities and counties making this presentation. That's where all of this information came from, except for our actual numbers. I have also heard from our state representatives and I talked to another state representative from another area that because they did not expect so many cities and counties to opt out of this. And when I was talking to them, I let them know if that floss had been an automatic, if we opt in and we automatically get the increase in the sales tax, that would be a whole different story that we were talking about here. But anyway, I thought I would point out that's where all of this information came from. So the process is we'll have 3 public hearings this morning's. The next one is Tuesday night, February 18th at 6 p.m. And then the final one is Thursday night at the regularly scheduled council meeting on February 20th at 6 p.m. And following those public hearings, council may choose to pass a resolution opting out of House Bill 581 after council hears from the public, considers, and then they may choose to have that. Now, because we are putting the agenda out sort of as we speak, the resolution for consideration will be on the agenda unless I hear otherwise, simply because we don't have time to put it on after the last public hearing, which is the same night of the agenda or the meeting. So again, if it's approved, the resolution must be submitted to the Georgia Secretary of State by March 1st.
Well, it can be, if it's on the agenda, and we can still vote. I mean,
right. You
one
can
way or the
vote.
other, it's not going to affect anything by
Right.
leaving it on there.
You can choose to remove it.
No,
right.
I say leave it on there. I mean, you know, council can make that decision that night.
Okay. Any questions?
Well, I'd like to open up and have a little discussion on this.
Great.
Just what's everybody's ideas and what do you like, what do you don't like?
I got some ideas. Like Tanya, I watched tons of YouTube videos and I learned some things. One of the things I learned is, let me start out by saying that when I saw that H.R. 581 on the ballot, I said, woo-hoo, yes, that sounds like a great idea. And I really didn't think anything else about it until January rolled around, and I started to see the reports in the news and so forth, and started trying to kind of dig into it. And one of the things that I saw, which I'll share with you, I thought it was kind of cute, is one of the council members in I don't remember where it was. Anyway, his comment was, what are the 40 most dangerous days in the state of Georgia? General Assembly session. And I understand that the General Assembly had a good idea here. It was a well-intended idea, but I don't think it's really panning out because I see lots of problems, not the least of which is a person got up after one of the council meetings in one of these cities, and it's at the end. They've already made their presentation, and he said, you know what? I really don't understand this. And I've sat through this presentation, and I still don't understand this. And I think that's a serious problem. It's a problem for me because I voted yes, and I think it's a problem for the voters who, just like T-Splosh, did not have any idea what it was all about and what the need was. So it sounded good. It looked good. I'm going to cap this thing at 3%, and I'm going to benefit from it. But who takes care of the inequities? Most of the municipalities that I've looked at, there are some cities that are just doing nothing, but most of them are doing exactly what we're doing. They're having hearings. They're trying to find out what this is all about, to find out if it's really a good thing for the city or not. So how about the inequity? The county opts out, city opts in. County opts in, city opts out. All over the state of Georgia. And then we got the folks living right next door to us. I'm paying a lot less tax than the guy who moves in next door. And that's, woohoo for me and not so good for him. But it's going to be a patchwork all over the place, at least the way that I see it. So I consider those things to be inequities. I think Tanya mentioned that word. It's just plain old inequity. And I know that shifting to businesses and renters seems like a really good idea, but it's not. That's still inequitable. And I know that rental properties aren't really aren't really popular, but they're still our citizens. And I don't know about you guys, but I started out in an apartment, and I don't see an alternative to apartments as we move forward in the housing market. They're a thing. And to shift the tax burden to those folks so that I can sit back and enjoy the benefit of the increase of my property value but not pay for it and expect somebody else to do that doesn't work for me. So those are just things that I've kind of been milling and mulling around over the last few weeks as we've kind of started this process.
So I hear everything you're saying about inequities, and I thought about that a lot when you said that because it kind of made me think about some things. We get the assessed value from the county, right? And they don't assess, like the value, the percentage doesn't go up equally for everybody, and it's assessed. And sometimes people don't get assessed, and other people do. I know there's been a number thrown around that said, from other areas that said, hey, we already have something in place and it's 3%. I did have a question about that. Is that 3% cumulative of the whole digest, or is it 3% on each individual property?
It is, so what the state legislature, our state representatives, put in place for Hall County and the city of Gainesville last year was a 3% cap on homesteaded properties. So they did it for Hall County and the Hall County schools. So it was same, but the superintendent mentioned that the state legislation that was passed by the legislature was worse than the floating homestead exemption. Did I answer your question?
I guess my question is it 3%, like, is every house value limited at 3%, or that 3% they're talking about, is it cumulative on the digest? Going back to my point, some people go up 15%, others stay flat, and it's based on, so from that standpoint, I'm just trying to understand that. And I'm not saying that it's the right way to do it, because, hey, if your value of your home goes up, then your value of your home goes up. I'm more concerned is that everyone gets assessed and they don't cherry pick where they assess.
Well, that's an assessor question, but our understanding of how this House Bill 581 works. So let's assume it's 3% every year. So say today's the base year. If your house is $450,000 and next year it goes up 3% because that's what inflation is, that'll become your new base for the next year. and then the next year will be, if it's 3%, it'll go up, and that'll be the new base. So, you know, if it's 100,000, it'll be 103 the next year, then one up. Right.
Probably do it just with a computer.
It's kind of like shutting the barn door if the horse is out, because why we're here is COVID. I mean, that is the biggie. That's when all the numbers got out of whack, and now we're trying to address something that's on the way down. Let me just follow that up.
Sure.
Just another thought. Let me see if I can get this organized. So, if we opt in by doing nothing, and we need more revenue, we have to raise the millage rate. With too much revenue, we reduce the millage rate.
Correct.
Is that what we do today?
Correct.
So what's the point? Why are we even here? I mean, what is the point of this bill? I just don't get it.
I can tell you. I think our folks down in Atlanta, when they go down there was just so much heat because of all the inflation and that. And, you know, maybe the cities, maybe the taxing entities didn't catch up to that. And as you can see, it's going down, and it's going to keep going down. And some people even say there's going to be a recession, but you know, I don't see that. But anyway, and I look back and just remember that's why I asked. I remember when the millage rate was lowered, and then next year they raised it back up again. You know, and again, we've had a steady millage rate for a long time, and the only thing, and again, I'm just going to talk about what you just said. I think the reason it went up is I think the people we send down there couldn't stand it, the heat, and they just raised it and said, okay, it's out of our hands, at the expense of all the cities. Again, at the expense of everybody that lives in the city. And so it's, yeah, that fixes it for them. They're happy, and they can say they did what they should. We went years here in this city without growing. It was tough. I think, Joe, you mentioned people didn't even get raises, you know, and
furloughs, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and furloughs, and yeah. Now, what's different today? We're starting to grow. People want to live here. People want amenities. They want the services that we give. And my feeling is, if we do that, first of all, and limit it, we don't know what's going to happen in a few years. We're only looking backwards at what we did and what happened. We're not looking forward. And we can always lower that millage rate. If you want to lower the taxes, that's the way the folks down in Atlanta dictated to the cities. Here's your tools. Use those millage rates. Raise them, lower them. When I first ran, one of the things that I noticed, and I talked about this when I spoke out, talking to the folks, about the difference in our commercial revenues versus our residential revenues. At the time, we were at about, it was less than 30%. I forget what it was, but it was very low. And then I looked up at Oakwood, our next door neighbors, and they were just the opposite of us. And we were at about, they had 30% and 70% commercial and all the other services that generate revenue. And they were at just opposite. They were at 70%. Now, we've gained some, but if we if we do anything, we don't want to hurt business growth for sure. And you know, I think keeping the millage rate is good. I don't know what we'll do, but if this thing passes and this city gets in trouble, you know, it's more borrowing and more cost to everyone, and I think we can do it ourselves, and I just don't think that we ought to let Big Brother down in Atlanta forever put their hands on us and say, "Whoa." You know, that's why we're elected, and I think that's the way it was meant to be. And I think they panicked and they satisfied. You know, I'm like Oliver. I can tell you, I didn't look into that when I voted last year when we voted for that, and I think the average citizen probably looks at those things less. But who wouldn't punch the ticket for lower taxes? I mean, anybody would do that, and I think that's what happened. But
Free money.
anyway, yep. But anyway, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I think, well, Ed and I did have a talk the other day, so he has some idea what my thoughts are. And just, you can look at it in all different ways. One of the things is that, in my mind, I don't expect the inflation to be that great as far as house values in this area, but even if they are, the number is not a staggering amount. When I look at the whole flow, and I agree with the idea that I don't think the state should have gotten involved. That I agree with. They did get involved, and it passed. I'm concerned that for what I consider, and I think when you look at all the things we have growing, and when the warehouses warehouse that we have start putting product in there, it dwarfs what this could impact us. It could have zero impact if the inflation rate, if our houses only go up 3 or 4% a year versus 7 or 8% a year over 10 years. This will not be a large amount of money, and I don't know if we're creating, you know, kind of poking the pig, so to speak. Everybody got a pretty high vote percentage. I don't know how many people are going to be convinced that I should not get this tax decrease that they asked for, and could that have a negative impact in November when we go for the SPLOST renew, because they say, hey, you guys just took away our other one, and the SPLOST is so much more important that we can't control that. If we lose SPLOST, that's a much bigger deal than saying to the people, we're not going to give you this. They think they're getting a tax decrease, or could get a slight tax decrease over time, or they're thinking they're going to get with what happened the last 2 years. The reality is, I don't see that this would be a significant amount of money to the city over the foreseeable future. And any impact that it does have, if it does get to the point where it has an impact, the millage rate can always be impacted. And even so, the current residents would get a slight advantage. I don't think as big as advantage as they would have if this had gone into effect 10 years ago. But there would be a slight advantage.Maybe someone else's house is 600 and yours had stayed at 500. In Flowery branch dollars, like you said, it's only 11 cents of the whole tax dollar. That I don't know if we're making too much of an issue that could create negative feelings for. Because I don't think anyone's going to. I know in other places having increases in taxes like this, and obviously with the county and the school board taxes, there are, I'm sure, some people who aren't 75 years old that are living in some of these houses in downtown Flowery Branch that are now assessed at 600 when they were assessed at 200 are feeling a real tax pinch. Okay, and the Flowery Branch part is not the killer. It's obviously Hall County and the other. So I just don't know if we're by opting out and telling the people, well, you were wrong to vote yes, and then, oh, by the way, we have SPLOST coming up. I don't know how that, if we're going to hurt ourselves for SPLOST. So I'm in favor of just letting the vote of the people stand and then control what we can control going downstream. That's the way I feel.
So speaking of the control, you would be in favor of ceding that control over our budget to the state as opposed to retaining it to the city?
Well, no, what I'm saying is that the amount that this impacts
is what's the point?
Is so small.
So why are we here?
Yeah, why are we here? We just should opt in. We just should have left it go and stayed in.
I think it needs to be discussed. I think it needs to be discussed.
No,
Yeah, that's why we're here.
And that's fine. That's why we're here. But
I think to ignore it would be wrong.
I definitely think there should be a control on the assessed value, because so many times we've been held to the standard of, we're raising taxes in the city, but we're keeping the millage the same, but we don't have any control over the assessed value of homes. And this was something that's needed to be done, and it needed to have, I think, the backing of the people, because when you back the people and you put it into a amendment, it can't just be turned around by 3 votes. On local boards or whatever it might be, councils. So, to me, there needs to be control on it. 3%, if you just the local that's out there, if you're getting a 3% raise a year, for most people, that's pretty hardy. That's pretty good. I will say that, I look at where our budget was back 10 years ago to where it is today.
Wow.
And the budgets of many cities and counties and school boards. The only real, I guess you could say, profession that has seen these kinds of increases are professional athletes. I mean, counties and cities and school boards are receiving massive amounts of increases in their revenues over the last 10 years. So to me also, I think, and I agree that, probably some more studying should have been done before people voted. But the people voted. 63% of Georgians voted, we need property tax relief. 68% of Hall County folks voted, we need property tax relief. To turn this thing down and to reverse it, to me, nullifies the vote of the people that went out and voted for this. This becomes a constitutional amendment, making it more difficult to change. Obviously, you'd have to do another constitutional amendment to change it. So, and have it sent out for referendum and all that kind of stuff. So, my thought is, you work within your means. We, counties, cities, are given, school boards are given the authority that they have by the state constitution. It's in the state constitution. So to say Big Brother's doing this, well, Big Brother had to prove that we would become a city. All these outfits that are trying to become cities now to try to get out of a situation where they're in their counties and trying to have a better control over their little area and become cities and become with cityhood, they're having to go and they're having to be voted on by the General Assembly to do so. So, yeah, we've got a Big Brother, and unfortunately, in some regards, it can be the county, and in many regards, it is the state, and in more regards, it is the federal government. That's just the way it goes. We are one of the lower levels of government, and we have big brothers that we just can't override. I mean, if we could, we could sit here and say all day long that no, we don't want that property to be used for that. We think it needs to be used for a park. So, private property owner, you can't sell this piece of property to a developer because we think it needs to be a park. Well, we can't do that because Big Brother, state constitution says you're in violation. Federal government, United States Constitution says you're in violation. So I don't view this as Big Brother. I view this as people who are elected at the state level saying, you know what, we need to put a measure in place to help people with property tax relief, and this is a good effort. And I will say, I just read an article last night. The state government, Brian Kemp and the folks that are down there right now, they are cutting state taxes right and left. They are giving back money to citizens. We got some money coming back here real soon that's already been approved because they got such a bevy of money. Again, state governments are, I mean, they're sitting with huge coffers of money. We're sitting with a nice amount of money here in Flowery Branch. So they're giving that money back, and they're put another measure in because they're going to try to give even more money back, up to $500 of refunds for married couples, $250 for single folks. That's already got. There's already one round of that already approved. They're going to be voting on a second round of that. So you know, the state. I don't think this is the state saying, you know, we're gonna try to fix things by putting it back on the cities and the counties and the school boards. I see the state also, and I'm very, very thankful that the state's doing it because they've cut, since Brian Kemp's been there, I think the state income tax was at a little more than 6%, or right at 6%. And they're saying if this next round goes through, it could be down to 4.99%.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that I'm for staying in this. You budget within your means. I also believe our 3.264 millage rate is fair for the citizens. It's fair for the city government. To me, we have the lowest, one of the lowest, I won't say lowest, we have one of the lowest millage rates of any city anywhere in Georgia that has a police department. I can go to Beaufort. Beaufort doesn't have a police department. They do have school resource officers. They got a 0 general millage. You go to Brazelton, they got 0 millage. But they also have a bevy of money that comes in through another
Commercial, a lot of the commercial.
So, and they do have a police department. But you look at every other city around here that has a police department, they do not have as low as the millage does. And to me, that millage allows for us to have a well-staffed, well-trained, well-equipped police department, and to start lowering that millage because we get a 7% inflationary increase in our budget. To me, what's it going to harm the most is going to be our police department because most of our, as far as departments go, that's where most of the money goes, is to our police, and rightfully so. And rightfully so, that's where most of it should go because I think that's one of the primary reasons we're here is for the security and the safety of the people and making those decisions. So that's that's my thoughts on it. I'm strongly opposed to opting out. I think it nullifies the vote of the people, and I think that we've got to live within our means just like the normal citizen who's out there busting their back every day has to live within their means.
Anybody else? We don't have an executive session.
If we have time, I would like to have one, but if we don't,
Got time?
Yeah, I've got a meeting with
Okay.
here, but I mean we still quorum, so.
okay,
Okay.
no worries. Maybe Tuesday night.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's fine.
How about public comments?
No, they're all, I can't see them. They're gone. Okay. We need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, good. Thank you, guys. Got to go to work. Let's see. Oh, no, we don't have to come first.
I thought we had another public hearing tonight. I have it on my calendar for
No, it's next.
Tuesday. Yeah,
it's next
which
Tuesday.
means I have to correct my calendar.
Well, wait a minute. You could show up and be same crowd.
That's true.
These are our voters.
Yeah.